So now learning strategy. So learning strategy is not just how you learn, but how you make learning strategic. So I would say how you maximize learning, and then how you maximize the alignment of the learning to your organization's mission. And the key question to sort of be constantly rehashing is how is what I am doing contributing to aligned with the organization's mission, and how can I make the demonstration of that explicit for all involved? And I would like to suggest that thinking about learning organizations, so learning organizations sort of theories have been around for quite a while. Learning organizations, knowledge management, there's quite a few sort of strands of how we work with knowledge in organizations. And humanitarian and development organizations have engaged with these sort of strands of thoughts. I'd like to refer to Watkins and Marsick's framework, which talk about. So there's two American researchers who originally wrote this book about sculpting the learning organization and describing it as kind of artistic process. You're shaping a creative vision to fit the context, using the raw materials at hand is how they described it. Not as not a destination, but a journey, not a formula, but sort of key principles that can be tailored to your organization's unique needs. And their starting point was really the incidental nature of learning. So most of the learning occurs spontaneously and organically, they said, evolving from the work itself. Yes. So I mean, think about what that means for the formal training that we do. Yes. If actually most of the learning that matters is outside of the control of and outside of the context of those formal trainings, what does that mean for where we focus resources and how we help improve organizational learning, including some of these most obvious sites when you actually need to prepare people to give them the skills they'll need to do something, or when you're trying to get to figure out what happened and how to make process improvements in terms of lessons learned and so on. So you're creating structures and cultures is what it's all about, where learning is continuous and ubiquitous. And this whole notion that you embed learning in the context of work itself. Now again, training has always been about I'll stop my work now to go off to a 2-day training. And here are these researchers in the early 1990s telling us without making that explicit link that actually what matters is the incidental stuff, the informal stuff, the stuff that at best we talk about as soft skills, and that we sort of, well, let it be. People will sort of figure it out. Um, and it turns out if you want to sort of maximize that learning, then if you want to maximize those kinds of learning, what you need is for people, staff, and volunteers to be capable of self-direction, to be capable of proactivity and creativity and critical reflection. And these sound like 21st century knowledge skills. Yes, these sound like the kinds of skills that will make a difference in a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environment where you don't have a command and control structure. So this sounds like much of the work that, obviously in disaster management context, it's obvious, but I think in other contexts as well, including development ones, um, we've known for a long time that it's skills that matter. But for example, with if you take something like a lot of the participatory approaches, working with communities, trying to sort of do assessments, assess needs with sort of community processes, what you get is a method that is supposed to be based on critical thinking, but what a bureaucracy will retain is the tools to implement it. Yes. So a lot of us are, sort of struggled and wrestled with these contradictions. We know that we want learning to be continuous, collaborative, creative, captured and codified, connected and collective, and to be about capacity building. So what Watkins and Marcy do is they claim, and on the basis of sort of accumulating evidence and statistical analysis and validity that comes from the methods they develop and then the analysis of those methods in a rigorous scientific framework, they say there's 7 things that organizations need to do, these 7 action imperatives that will actually help drive your organization towards organizational learning. And furthermore, they're going to claim and back up that by improving organizational learning, you're improving the performance of the organization. So you no longer, I don't want to jump ahead too much, but you no longer have to sort of prove yourself. There's a model that sort of demonstrates this for you. So what are these 7 things? Create continuous learning opportunities, promote inquiry and dialogue. And these are all nice things. I'm sure nobody doesn't want to do this, but the reality and the first question to ask is, to what extent are we doing it or not in each of our organizations? We can encourage collaboration and team learning, empower people toward a collective vision, connect the organization to its environments, establish systems to capture and share learning. And 7, and this one warrants a sort of specific discussion, provide strategic leadership for learning. So I think a really important point here is about leaders and sidekicks. And Watkins and Marsick found in their research that you have leaders who are primary gatekeepers of change. So if your line manager does not support the change you want to implement to sort of improve organizational learning, I don't think, other than focusing your efforts on changing her mind, yes, the evidence says the model, and the model built from it shows that they must transform themselves to model the learning process. And you've got to have sort of one or more individuals driving the vision. And I think this may be a role in which learning and development managers might recognize themselves. You need the sidekick. You need the person who knows how to sort of manage the change, and who's going to sort of help bring that vision to life and sort of move people in that direction. Help people move people, move people in that direction. So the model looks like this. You've got a people level, which you've got 4 of the 7 things. You've got the structural level, and then you've got the sort of outputs, and this is of course for the corporate or for-profit world. So increase of organization financial performance. I would substitute with just organizational performance. So it is useful to think about how your organization is doing on all these things, because of the nomological validity that's been demonstrated through the research done by Watkins and Marsick and other researchers, showing that if you do these 7 things, you get these 2 things as outcomes. Yes. So what I would like you to do now in the context of the workshop is to choose one of the 7 imperatives. And you need 2 pieces of paper. On the first one, you write down an action taken by your organization, and describe sort of which action imperative it relates to, and describe what you're actually doing. So if you've got a leadership program that you think is encouraging collaboration and team learning, then you put that down. And you pair up with a partner, you share each other's action, and then you swap the imperatives. And you look at the imperative, and for example, if you get promote inquiry and dialogue, and you do not see anything that your organization is doing explicitly for this new imperative that you've been handed by your partner, then you write that imperative down on paper too. So the idea is you get a diagnostic of the gaps in your organization. And once you've gone through that process with one person in the workshop, you raise your hand and find a new partner. You mix, rinse, and repeat. So what the game aims to do, obviously, is to get that diagnostic and also just share ideas. So you can realize that you're not starting from a blank slate. There's probably things that you're already doing, either overtly or that are happening simply out of people's sort of individual creativity and so just a need to solve specific problems that align with the model. The point is, how can you make it intentional and strategic? And that's really where you then get to that next part of the discussion. Once you've identified this, how do you move forward? How do you make the learning strategic? So you want to audit the present capacity to learn and change. The individual, the group, the organization, and then the society. And you want to sort of build that learning infrastructure, but ultimately it's going to be about the learning habits in people and sort of regularly auditing how you're doing. You need what we might call in a learning context, a sort of formative assessment. How are you doing? Now, it's about the details, and Watkins and Marsick say becoming a learning organization is in the details of daily life, how organizations interact with their people. Yes. Now, the business case is the relationship between the learning organization dimensions and the performance of the organization. And this is where this term, nomological validity, is the evidence that the structural relationships among the variables, so among the action imperatives, have been measured and tested against a variety of persons, settings, times, and methods. So if you do these 7 things, you're likely to improve these outcomes, and that's what that's what can sort of move things forward in discussions in trying to show that this model can be useful in such a context. But the starting point, it starts with diagnosis, and diagnosis is identifying how are you doing in these different areas, and the way in which Watkins and Marsick addressed this question of diagnosis, the sort of starting point, a stepping stone to sculpting a learning organization, is something called the DLOC, the Dimensions of Learning Organization Questionnaire. Now, the DLOC is basically, I believe it's 60 questions. It's a copyrighted questionnaire. It's been adapted to a number of contexts by Watkins and Marsick, and I'd like to invite interested organizations that are interested in learning and development managers in particular that would like to diagnose how their organizations are doing on this continuum of learning organizations on this journey. One very simple, effective thing that we could do together would be to organize to organize a DLOC, Dimensions of Learning Organization questionnaire, for a number of humanitarian and development organizations, which give us a basis for comparison, as well as for internal usage to determine what the gaps are and how to address them, which would be up to each individual organization, even though there would certainly be room there for sort of discussions between us on how we could work together.